Hello and welcome viewers. You're watching our continued coverage of the budget, and joining us right now are three very eminent persons responsible for the entire budget making exercise. Of course, we have the Chief Economic Advisor, we have the Finance Secretary and also the DPAM Secretary. Welcome to Sansad TV, all of you, and thank you so much for joining us. Mr. CA, let me begin the program with you. Sir, something that your economic survey also mentioned, creating public-private partnership, ensuring ease of living and ensuring ease of doing business as well. So today also your budget received a thumbs up, saying that it was a difficult balancing act, right from managing growth to also keeping the fiscal deficit under check. Do you think this budget has paved way what we've been talking about, the Amrit Kal?
Without doubt, this budget has paved the way for Amrit Kal because what the budget has done is to touch upon these very aspects that you just now mentioned. It does pursue both ease of living and ease of doing business through single business identifiers, common KYC, common approach to updating location, addresses, etc. And it puts more money in the hands of the people. It pursues green energy ambitions of India in a very systematic and targeted manner. So in all these ways, at the same time, it does all of these without sacrificing macroeconomic stability, because the timeline for meeting the fiscal deficit by 25-26 is maintained, and the emphasis on public investment is also there, and without necessarily crowding out the private sector. So in all respects, the budget actually enhances the case for steady and sustained economic growth in the coming years.
All right, over to you, sir. So one of the challenges that we've been talking about, well, of course, is the inflation. In these troubled times, the geopolitical situation that we had, of course, India was successful in containing inflation to a great extent. The other problem, of course, is about employment. We've been talking about the multiplier impact as well. But so the recent layoffs that we are seeing, that, of course, sends jitters across the globe. So two things, inflation and employment. How does the budget address it?
So first on inflation,
Yes.
the first thing that I would say is our institutional architecture now gives the primary role to the Reserve Bank on inflation and only a secondary role to the government. So the Reserve Bank has, I think, discharged that responsibility successfully, and that's why we are seeing a steady decline in both the consumer price index and the wholesale price index in recent months, following the steps which the Reserve Bank took in terms of changing interest rates and amending their credit policy. The government has played a supporting role and will continue to play a supporting role in terms of altering import and export duties on items of common consumption, in terms of making releases from a grain stockpile when prices warrant that, in terms of changing tax rates occasionally, as we have done on petrol and diesel. So that supporting role the government will continue to play. And I think inflation is moderating, and I think the next year is likely, most probably, and I think the Chief Economic Advisor would agree, to be better than last year, unless something unforeseen or which is big and exogenous happens. Barring that, I think the next year is going to be better in terms of inflation control. Coming to employment, there are a number of steps in this budget to promote employment. First, I think the massive expansion of capital expenditure over the last 3 years, from 5.5 to now 10 lakh crores, is in and of itself a very big generator of employment, and not just employment, it is employment of the semi-skilled and unskilled variety, because the construction sector is one of the biggest employers of the semi-skilled. And I think that is a big fillip that we are giving to employment in the economy. Second, there is the scheme that was announced of extra credit to micro and small enterprises, 2 lakh crores at a reduced cost of borrowing. And these are the most employment-intensive enterprises in the country. So when they invest more, the expected employment impact is far more than when a similar investment is made by large corporations. And then there are a number of other measures for training, skilling, nursing colleges. So there's a whole list. So I think there is a lot in the budget to promote gainful employment as well as to control inflation.
So another point I'd like to touch upon is the private investment, of course. Since a very long time, we've been complaining that private investment has remained muted. Do you think this budget propels the private investment and the capex that we're talking about?
I think it does everything that the government can do to propel private investment. There are things that the government can do, and there are things only others can do. But I think whatever the government can do to induce private capital investment, the budget, I think, has done to a very large extent. And I would say that, again, I'm taking a cue from the economic survey. I think there are incipient signs of that beginning to trigger a revival in private capital investment.
Lastly, about the startups, sir. Uh, the economic survey again mentioned about, they have to come back to India, make India as their base. This year's budget and the startups.
Well, there are some tax proposals for startups. The date by which startups can register for a tax exemption has been extended by 1 year, and we've also provided for an elongation of the period during which they remain tax-free. So these are two important tax proposals for startups, and I think the change in the maximum marginal rate of income tax coming down from 42.7% to 39% is also something that is attractive to successful startups.
More of disposable income in that case, of course, taken. On that note, thank you so much, sir. Let's go to the DPM Secretary now. Sir, the market is volatile. We are living in uncertain times. Pandemic, geopolitical situation, the war. In this scenario, your disinvestment target and the challenges ahead.
I think you're very right actually, because if we have disinvestments which are critically dependent on several factors. One is the kind of bandwidth we have. The second important thing, as you mentioned, is the markets. The third important thing is that whenever we do market sales, we have to keep in mind the interests of the minority shareholders. And the fourth, of course, is the processes involved and the process time involved in when we are doing actually a transfer of management control, when we do actually privatization. So taking into consideration all these factors, the one is the disinvestment target has been, kept at a reasonable practical level based on borne out of our experience. The second most important factors from the CPSC is the dividend that they give. And dividend is important because it is a part of the government savings. Because if you have government is invested in the CPSCs, then they must yield return, first profits, and then from profits they must also send dividend out. Now, the profit is also invested in terms of using that as an equity for capex, and capex is another third important factors. And the 10 lakh crores that we have been talking about is only the government capex.
Right.
But the over and above 10 lakh crores is about 4 lakh crores, which is the capex done by the CPSCs out of their internal and extra budgetary resources.
That's right.
So therefore, I think that's a very important, again, providing a fillip to the capital spending, and in turn to the generation of inducement of private capital formation. Because if the government spends, there are a whole lot of investments which take place in private sector, and also generate a whole lot of jobs. Because as Finance Secretary mentioned, so much of employment intensity of construction and infrastructure. So therefore, I think we are looking at, in a holistic way, three things, and from actually Deepam's side. One is dividend, another is disinvestment receipts, and the third is, of course, the capex from CPSCs.
All right, point well taken. On that note, thank you so much, gentlemen, for giving us that perspective.
Thank you.
Well, viewers, with camera person Yogesh, I'm Kruti Mishra for Sansad Television.